Presented by the Common Sense Institute, welcome to Common Sense Digest, the podcast that seeks to inject a little common sense into Colorado's policy discussion. Here's your host, Earl Wright.
Welcome to Common Sense Digest podcast. My name is Earl Wright, and I am chairman of the board of Common Sense Institute and your host. At this point, every Coloradoan should be intimately familiar with traffic, road congestions in our state. It's justifiable to want to know why our state is so congested and why nothing seems to have changed. And we're going to discuss that in a little bit. Fortunately, the Common Sense Institute Transportation Fellow Ben Stein knows the history, has the experience, and knows the present situation in Colorado's transportation policy world. Ben, welcome. Good to have you on board.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here, Earl.
Ben, you and Henry Savane did a study back in 2020 that you did as fellows for Common Sense. And it was a groundbreaking study as far as Colorado goes. It showed that we had really insufficiently taken care of our highways and bridges, and that we had a backlog of construction needed, as well as new highways and new transportation needed for the current mode of transportation at that time, which was mostly the automobile and truck. Remind us of the 2020 study, if you would, a little bit, as to what you thought needed to be done at that time, and then let's transition into where we are today.
Sure, glad to do that. And it's great to be back with the Common Sense Institute and to have had a second bite at the apple, as it were. So an important thing to remember about 2020 is we wrote that report just as COVID was really reaching its peak, or in this case, I guess maybe it's a valley of difficulties. And the transportation, in terms of what it was going to look like, wasn't quite sure at that point. And the reason I say that is, with social distancing, people had stopped taking mass transit. People were remote working. And there was a lot of question as to whether things were going to change in a fundamental way in terms of transportation patterns. And so an argument could be made at that moment that while the roads were not in very good shape, that maybe we should pause and see what was going to happen when COVID ended and would fundamentally work and commuting patterns and transit usage and all those patterns fundamentally change. And so that was a major question in that report. While that report talked about the current state of the roads and some of the issues, it also said we needed to make maybe a pause and take another look once COVID was over. Well, thanks to the Common Sense Institute, I'm getting that bite at the apple now. And we are now back. We're far enough out of COVID to look and see, did COVID fundamentally change things? And the answer is, in one regard, yes, and in one regard, no. And the regard where the change is really taking place is mass transit. Mass transit obviously cratered at the time because with social distancing, basically people stopped taking mass transit. Fast forward to now, years later, and people are still not using mass transit in Colorado.
Aren't they even using it less than they did before the pandemic?
They're using it more than they did at the bottom of the valley in 2020 of COVID. And so RTD is out there wonderfully saying, our ridership is up. Well, it all matters where the base year, isn't it? Well, the base year logically should be 2019 pre-COVID. But they're using, of course, 2021 or so as their base. Mass transit ridership is still down dramatically, and yet we're still spending enormous amounts of money on mass transit. And I'll go back to my issues with mass transit in a minute. But in the meantime, our use of the highway system is back up. Last year, our vehicle miles traveled by cars and trucks in this state equal to what it was pre-COVID. And it's going to keep going up because our population continues to go up. People are not using mass transit. We have more people coming to the state. We have more freight coming to the state, which means our highway system is continuing to be used more than ever.
Could you stop there for a second? So it's 5 years. Okay. Now versus 2020. Mm-hmm. Did we, between now and or 5 years ago, did we do much, if any, of the highway improvements and the additional backlog that you all said needed to be done? Did we start it? Help us out. Maybe we've got more cars, maybe have less ridership, but that's all well and good if the highway system is better and we have an interstate system that you don't clunk along now don't clunk along like we used to. Or is it still the same?
Well, the short answer is it's not the same. The Department of Transportation has made some road improvements. Central 70 was finished. That was a multi-billion-dollar project. Whether that was the right place to spend the money is a different question.
Well, Central 70 is what for the rest of us?
I-70 going through the city of Denver basically from Pena Boulevard on the one end, or 225, to I-25. It's intersection with I-25.
Okay.
And we spent a fortune, and I mean a fortune, well over $1 billion on that one project. We currently have the Floyd Hill project going on, which is an I-70 going into the mountains. That project is important. It is, however, a $700 million project, and that's a lot of money to spend in one location. But in the meantime, the roads of our state, they just haven't been able to keep up. There's more wear and tear than ever on our roads, and bottom line is neither on capacity improvements nor on maintenance of the infrastructure has CDOT been able to keep up.
Let's review that for a second. It hasn't been able to keep up. Is the money not available, or are we not planning for it? Why aren't we keeping up?
It's a combination of things, but there are a lot of factors that come together to cause this problem. One of the most significant ones, interesting enough, is, as we know, in the last 4 years, we've had tremendous inflation.
Okay.
And unfortunately, Colorado Construction Index, which is the measured cost of doing major road work in Colorado, from 2019 to now has gone up 45%. We all know inflation has gone up a lot. The CPI, the normal measure of inflation, has gone up by 23%. And you know how painful that's been for the average citizen. Well, for CDOT, a 45% increase in construction costs is something its budget absolutely cannot handle.
So the Colorado Department of Transportation, if they wanted to do something in 2019, it now costs 50% more now to do it in 2025.
Not quite that much, but close. Yes.
Okay.
Pretty serious. The cost of labor has gone up tremendously. The cost of concrete, the materials. It's amazing how much goes into a construction project. It's between the labor and and of course, the other ever-present point that raises costs of transportation projects. When you're building any major new project, as you know, or reconstruction, the environmental costs are amazing. The amount of time and money that has to go into getting the clearances can take forever.
Well, wait, let me understand that. If you already have construction, a highway laid down, and you're trying to improve it or try to expand it, are you telling me you have to go through environmental impact studies all over again? How does that work?
It depends on the project and depends on the circumstance. If you're simply repaving the existing lane miles, that's not an issue. If you want to widen the highway, increase its capacity in a material way, you're going to have to go through an environmental clearance process. And a good example, actually, is Central 70. Central 70, it took over 10 years to get it environmentally cleared to be built. I bet it cost $50 million just to get all the environmental clearances and permissions for that project.
And it cost us over $1 billion, you say, to construct it?
Yes.
My goodness. Okay. Well, see, you point out in the study, CDOT does not get enough revenue from its normal revenue sources.
That is correct.
And just point out, if you would please, just educate our podcast audience, those revenue sources and how they do or don't meet CDOT's budget.
The basic revenue source for CDOT is a motor fuels tax that's on special fuels, which is like natural gas, diesel fuel, and gasoline. And CDOT receives a state tax, which is in cents per gallon, for every gallon of motor fuel that's sold. And that goes in what's called the Highway Users Tax Fund. And those monies are distributed to CDOT, municipalities, and counties within the state of Colorado. The federal government also provides a very large percentage of the state's budget for transportation. Interestingly enough, it also relies upon a cents per gallon motor fuel tax for most of its revenues. And as a result, as cars become more efficient and use less fuel per mile traveled, cars are using the roads more, so are trucks, and yet they're paying less for that usage because they're becoming more fuel efficient. Now, obviously, fuel efficiency is good for many things, but it is not good for the budget of CDOT.
Well, and you also just pointed out that all of the construction has gone up 40 to 50%. I know it's somewhere between that. And yet you're saying that the revenue source has gone down.
Yes, because motor fuel, one thing that has not gone up significantly in price in the last 5 years is the cost of a gallon of fuel.
So we don't have revenues matching up with the expenses.
That is correct.
So how is that being made up then?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the legislature's done a couple of things to address that. The most significant one it did was it created some new fees. In 2021, the legislature passed a bill, 21260, and that bill created a retail delivery fee. The retail delivery fee means that whenever you get a package from Amazon or FedEx or any of the other for-profit delivery services, there's now a fee of about a little over a quarter on each delivery.
Okay.
There's also a fee on ride shares. Uber, Lyft, and those types of services also have a fee. Now, their fee is split. It's about 30 cents if it's a regular vehicle. If it's an EV that's giving you the lift, they have the fee.
Okay.
To encourage that. And then they put rental car fees into effect as well. So those three fees are there. The other big thing they did in the bill was they put in, over time, an increase of 8 cents per gallon on diesel and gasoline sales. The diesel sales, the tax on diesel sales, goes to the Colorado Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise to maintain our state's bridges and tunnels. The 8 cents that comes from gasoline is going into the Highway Users Tax Fund to be split between CDOT, the counties, and the municipalities. However, because of some legislative issues, the legislature has delayed the timing and implementation of that 8 cent per gallon increase on the gasoline that goes for roads. So that fee is not completely enforced yet. And then the other thing about the 8 cents, and this is the most important point about it, is it started out as 2 cents in the first year, and then it goes up a penny a year.
Okay.
To get to 8 cents in 2029. What that really is going to do is maybe, but by the time you get there, because of the rates of inflation, we'll end up basically where we are again.
Okay. Now, we have the other fees, though, you're talking about.
Yes.
And are all those other fees, it seems to me, are starting to fill that gap between what the CDOT budget is and what they have in the way of revenues, or do those fees fill the gap?
Well, as a matter of fact, they don't, Earl.
Oh.
And the reason they don't is because they're not being used for transportation infrastructure. One would think the transportation-related fees would go toward transportation infrastructure. However, the legislature and the governor have decided those fees should be used for alternative modes of transportation. And by that, I mean, primarily, they're going toward electric vehicle charging station building and encouraging more bike paths and pedestrian facilities. And most of all, towards subsidies for increasing the fleet of electric vehicles, both by private owners and commercial and public sector owners.
Oh, is this the subsidization we get if we buy a...
Yes. Most of this money is not going to the average private citizen for theirs. Okay. That's been coming from a different source. This is going for commercial vehicles to be subsidized, to be transitioned over, and also for public fleets, for example, school buses.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought we were talking about roads, highways, and unless I'm missing something, electrical vehicles also use roads and highways. And I also know for a fact that vans with EVs are much heavier than vans with combustion engines. So I would think they might even be harder on the highways.
Well, they are heavier, and I can assure you they need just as much roadway as do fossil fuel-powered vehicles. The amount of wear and tear they put on the roads is not that much more significant, because what really beats up an existing road is freight trucks.
Talk to us about that, if you would, for a second.
Sure.
So we've already said we've got a deficit. Mm-hmm. We already have fees that are being used for other sources, and so it's not closing the gap that we have. Right. And now we have the largest damage, if you can say it that way, that's created, or wear and tear, is on trucks going across this great state of Colorado. What is the issue? What is the issue now, and what's it look like for the future?
The amount of usage the roads are going to get is only going to increase. And it's not just cars. Cars do create wear and tear on roads, and they also, of course, create congestion. Large trucks really hammer a road. To give you an idea, the rule of thumb is that a single 80,000-pound tractor trailer driving across the state causes as much damage to a road as 5,000 trips by cars.
5,000?
Yes. A single trip. Even if our state was to completely transition to mass transit, and all of a sudden tomorrow every car would disappear off the roads, nothing is being done to replace the truck as the primary means of transportation of goods into, out of, and through the state of Colorado. To give you an idea, 300 million tons of freight a year are moved in the state of Colorado. And by 2050, that number is going to go up by another 200 million tons. Nothing's going to change that factor in anything that anybody is doing right now.
So you're saying that as far as the future goes, the wear and tear is probably going to be more wear and tear is going to come from trucks than possibly from automobile transportation. Is that fair?
I think that's a fair statement. Congestion will come from cars, wear and tear from freight.
And do we get a fee from the truckers or mileage or something that covers that cost associated with freight?
Well, as I said earlier, the fuel tax applies to diesel.
Okay.
Diesel is a proxy for truck traffic.
Okay.
Okay. So yes, trucks do pay. Whether they're paying enough is another question. But I will point out that, as I said, the fee, the 8-cent fee on gasoline has been delayed by the legislature. The 8-cent fee on diesel has not. That fee is continuing to be collected on the original schedule. So there is somewhat more money being collected, but that money is going exclusively for bridges.
Was our bridge situation improved? Because I know it was a big issue in 2020.
Our bridges are the one bright spot in the system. Now, the number of bridges that need to be replaced is not decreasing every year. So while our bridge situation is not bad, it's not wonderful. The bridges are the one spot where we can probably keep doing acceptably, I would say. I
know in your study you've pointed out, the fees and things directly associated with raising money for the highway system is not quite covering all the costs. So the legislature has come up with general funds money. Help me out if you would. I was confused in that I didn't see that the general funds money were necessarily going to improve the highways. Or did I miss something in reading the report?
No, you did not miss anything. So the general fund money that's going to CDOT, first off, let me be clear. CDOT historically has always gotten in trouble when it's relied upon the general fund for transportation money, because general fund monies are every year at the discretion of the legislature. And when times are good, they get some money. And when times are bad, they don't. And when I was the budget director at the Colorado Department of Transportation, we were relying upon receiving a general fund allocation. It was called SB1 money at the time, to pay off the certificates of the bonds. Technical term was not bond, but effectively they were bonds that were used to build T-Rex and the big projects on I-25. Well, the legislature ran into a bind. I was expecting $150 million into the budget at CDOT to make the annual bond payment. And all of a sudden I got a call one day that said, gee, you're not going to get your general fund money this year. So I got to tell everybody at CDOT I was going to pull $150 million that had already been budgeted for other highway maintenance work to make the bond payments. So the legislature, in its wisdom, decided between 2018 and 2022 to issue $2 billion worth of, they call them certificates of participation, they're really bonds, which about $1.8 billion went to the Department of Transportation for road work, which is great news. However, that gets you cash in the short term. In the long term, those bonds have to be paid off. And it's about $150 million a year for 20 years to pay them off. The deal at the time was that CDOT would come up out of its budget with $50 million and that the legislature would pay the other $100 million of the $150 million.
Hold on, stop. Okay, we got that. So you're supposed to come up with $50 million out of your budget. I think we all need to understand how this works. So did you create new fees or new gas tax, or how did you come up with an additional $50 million to pay off these bonds?
Well, the good news is I left CDOT. It's somebody else's problem now.
Yeah, okay.
I retired in 2014. So I wasn't the one who got the call this time. They simply worked their budget on the assumption that $50 million of their asset management budget, infrastructure budget, was to pay debt service for work that had already been paid for, that had already been done.
Okay.
And that the other 100 would come from the legislature. Well, the legislature this year is having a budget problem. 64 million of that money isn't coming this year. So the legislature is cutting back. The legislature also, to help it with its favorite problems, cut the road usage fee I was telling you about, where they were going to get another fee that CDOT has. It's called it's a registration fee, basically, by $3.70 a person to help the general fund budget. I'm going to say probably somewhere in the $90 million range is being taken out of the CDOT budget that was not expected to be taken out at this point. And that always hurts. So relying on the general fund for transportation funding is it's welcome money when it arrives, But if you count on it, it can often burn you.
Ben, it just seems like it's a little bit of a house of cards, or it's like the pea under three shells. Where's the pea? And you mix it around, and who knows if it's going to show up or not.
I will make one other comment to your point, though. In addition to that money, the legislature, other than the $100 million it quote unquote promised in 2018 when these certificates bonds were done, all other general fund monies that have come to CDOT since that time have specifically not gone toward infrastructure. It's gone to what's called the Multimodal Options Fund, or it's gone to revitalizing main streets, which are mostly grants to local governments for bike lanes, transit facilities, or pedestrian facilities.
Wait, so you're telling me that the general fund, in the past, you could either put it towards construction and improvements in the transportation, yes, or help pay off the bond.
Yes.
And now you're telling me that the general fund is giving you money, but it can't be used for those two?
Yes.
So in effect, we are continuing to dig a hole for ourselves in trying to make the improvements we need in our highway system. Help us out. Where does that put us relative to the rest of the country in our highway system? If we're number one or number two, well, who cares? I mean, if we're up there and everything that moving this money around, this shell game, it works, well, who cares? Or should we care?
Well, I think we should care. And I'm going to really quote quickly. There's an organization called the Reason Foundation that does an annual evaluation of different states' conditions of their highways and roads. The Reason Foundation's report in 2025 has Colorado, and I'm going to read this because I don't want to make a mistake. From 2019 to 2025, Colorado's ranking has gone from 43rd overall. Our pavement condition is 47th for our rural roads and 45th for urban roads. The study also found that on average Coloradan spends 36 hours stuck in traffic congestion. So going from 36th to 43rd is not a trend that we probably want to be on.
No, I wouldn't think so. House of cards or shell game and moving money around has resulted in what you just described. I'm going to put you on the spot, Ben.
Sure.
You've been there, you've seen it, you've done it, you've done the study. And if you were the omniscient dictator on this particular situation, what's the answer in your mind from a 5-year perspective and maybe even for a decade that we as concerned citizens should be looking at our elected representatives and the executive branch and saying, hey, folks, please consider help me out with the answer.
And I'm going to say the answer comes in two parts. In the immediate or short term, these fees that have been added, the short-term rental car fee, the retail delivery fee, and the ride-sharing fee, it would make sense that those are transportation-related fees, and they should go for a transportation-related purpose. Now, I know that there's an argument that environmental mitigation is a transportation-related cost. That's fine to say. First, I believe that we have to have the infrastructure for the sake of our economy and our Colorado lifestyle and way of life. We need to have roads to get our freight here, for people to get to work, to get kids to school, to get to the mountains, to do those things that make Colorado the place it is that we want to live. And that can only happen if we maintain the infrastructure. And so that should be the priority. And these fees should, at least in the short term, be redirected toward infrastructure. Alternatively, the average citizen should be aware that those fees are going to something else. And if the average citizen of Colorado says, I think it's wonderful that I get stuck in traffic every day and I can't get to the mountains because of the congestion on I-70 or on Berthoud Pass, but for the sake of removing a small amount of greenhouse gases from the emissions from the atmosphere, it's worth it, fine. I can't imagine that the average Colorado citizen understands that those fees are going for those purposes rather than for fixing the infrastructure. If that's what they believe and that's what they want, so be it.
But you're saying they don't have a say in that.
Not at this point.
And who makes that decision, by the way? If you were that omniscient dictator, who would you tell that, hey, change this right now? Or is it something that has to be legislated?
It would have to be legislated.
Oh my. Okay, so it's written in the legislature.
It's on statute. Yes.
All right.
Okay. In the long term, I do want to make one other comment after I make the long-term one, and that is, in the long term, the existing resources based upon fuel taxes in their current configuration are not going to be sufficient to maintain the kind of transportation system to get Coloradans the services that they expect and need. And at some point, we are probably going to have to go to a vote of the people and create some sort of additional, I guess if I'm going to have to say tax, as long as the citizens know what it's going to be used for exactly, and that they are going to get their money's worth from the expenditure of those funds. And make it a value proposition that the average Coloradan understands why he or she should vote for it.
Give me a longer term kind of scoping of how you think things could be better handled or hopefully be handled.
I'm actually going to tell you the opposite. First, Governor has just issued his Transportation Vision 2035 study. It's available. Look it up. It shows his vision for what our transportation system will look like in 10 years. It's, I believe, about 35 pages long, and there's not one word, or maybe there's one and I missed it, word about infrastructure improvements in that document, other than bike paths and pedestrians. What that document is about is electric vehicles, mass transit in particular, and changing housing patterns in Colorado to transit-oriented development to force people onto mass transit. Mass transit, to give you an idea, in the regional transportation district, Metro Denver, every citizen pays $275 a year to RTD via taxes. When a rider gets an RTD, it costs $18 to move that rider. That doesn't include the fare that rider paid. He says it will take a minimum of an 83% increase in mass transit to achieve his goals. To me, that's interesting because I don't know how that's going to work for someone who lives in Basalt. Well, actually, in Basalt, they have Roaring Fork Transit. That's actually a better transit system. In Kiowa or many of the other places, or Pueblo, how is that going to work for those people? It's an interesting proposition. I don't see what it says nothing about what we're going to do about freight movement. And it says nothing about how we're going to maintain the infrastructure that these buses are going to run on. But that's the transportation vision of our governor that is being implemented as we speak.
Well, we're not trying to be political on these calls, as you know, and I think you're trying to be very careful. But I guess, Ben, that I'm going to be just rather pragmatic here for a second. At the present time, we have issues. And what I hear you saying is that the means of moving our population around at the present time has got problems, and you don't see anything that is going to help in the short term solve those problems that is current legislation or what the governor is suggesting. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot. If you take into account what the governor is suggesting and you see where we are at the present time, are you telling me, just the average citizen, that, hey, Earl, it doesn't look all that bright for the transportation system to have kind of repairs and expansion that's going to alleviate the congestion and some of the terrible conditions of some of the highways in some spots are already in. Am I hearing this correctly?
Well, Earl, first off, I would never say that you're an average citizen. Do you remember the Prairie Home Companion on National Public Radio, where everyone was above average? I can assure you, you belong to the above average group.
All right. Well, let's pretend for a moment that I'm average, so help me out.
Okay. I did not go into this particular study expecting the results that I obtained. In fact, I thought I was looking at this initially at the general fund, and I was simply going to say, gee, we need to stop relying on the general fund, and that's that. I did not appreciate in any way, shape, or form the extent to which the vision of where transportation policymakers are moving transportation today is going, and was not happy with the result I came up with because I find it somewhat distressing. I'm trying to be tactful with my wording.
I guess it's the same plea that we oftentimes make back to our podcast listeners. Get involved, get informed, and let people know that you know what's going on, and you'd really like to have them, if at all possible, change things down at the legislature or talk to their folks and let them know that, hey, we know what's going on, and maybe read the report that we have. It's very clear what you said, and I just can't imagine that if somebody takes 20 minutes and reads it, they're not going to say, oh my goodness, we're heading in the wrong direction, even with the governor's hopes of having the transportation system he's talking about. Present time, we're heading in the wrong direction to support even what he wants to do. Do you have any other advice for us and our listeners and with regards to this?
I think the average citizen needs to understand nothing is free. There are trade-offs. And I fully recognize and understand the desire for environmental mitigation. But people have to understand that there are costs to that. It's not free. There's a group of transportation-related fees and taxes. And if they're used for environmental mitigation as opposed to infrastructure, your day-to-day way of life is going to be fundamentally altered over time. Not today, but tomorrow. And not that far in the distant future either. And I don't think that gels well with the reasons why people want to be in Colorado.
Well, I have to agree with you. Ben, thank you so much for your time. We can't thank you enough for what you've done for the state of Colorado with your public service, getting involved, and being such an objective source of information for us so we can begin to understand this issue. Ben, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Common Sense Digest. For more on today's topic, as well as our research on the most pressing public policy issues facing Colorado, please visit commonsenseinstituteco.org. The preceding episode, along with all others, is available on podcatchers everywhere, or on our website under the podcast tab. Our technical producer is John Ekstrom and Deft Communications. This has been a production of the Common Sense Institute.